So,
Good.
So let's start with a short introduction on yourself.
Okay. I can introduce myself. My name is Kristine Lund. I'm originally from California, USA, and I've lived in Sweden for 7 years. So I'm a doctoral student here at Lund University. And my Mona Eklund is my main supervisor, and my project is evaluating or researching about the Balancing Everyday Life Bell lifestyle intervention that Elizabeth Argensal and Mona Eklund have created, and through their research project have implemented in the Swedish healthcare system.
And what do you think about occupational sciences? Because that is our topic of interest, framework we want to spread in French-speaking area. What do you think about it? And maybe the links, the connection between occupational therapy and occupational sciences in practice, in research, and academic world?
I think occupational science is important, but I was educated at University of Southern California, USC. I graduated in '96 with my bachelor's and '98 with my master's, and even then occupational science was the focus. So I've kind of grown up in the occupational science world. So to me it was never even a question. It was there, and it was very important. But I have to say that as a clinician and then as a doctoral student, I think it's really important. I think occupational science is really important because before we had occupational science, we were borrowing our knowledge from all of the different professions. And we couldn't even, most of my teachers, most of the professors and teachers when I was going through school, they all had their PhD studies in a different topic. So it could be psychology or education or neurology or something. But in order to go in to become a researcher and to learn about research, we had to go into a different field. And so, occupational science, they say it was an idea whose time had come. I think Yerkes said that. Somebody said that, but Yerkes, talks about how internationally it was an idea whose time had come, because I think the occupational therapists around the world were realizing that we need our own science, and we need to be able to do research, on occupational therapy, but also on occupation on its own. So I think occupational science is a exciting science because it focuses on the things that we do on occupation, and it looks at what influences occupation. So it could be culture, it could be experiences, it could be the environment, but then, so it's what affects occupation, but also how occupation affects us and the culture and the environment. And so I think it's very interesting. The other thing that I think is interesting about occupational science is that it invites people from different fields. So it's not just occupational therapists who are occupational scientists.
So let's speak about occupational balance. What is your consideration about this concept?
Well, occupational balance is something that I've looked at in my second article in part of my doctoral studies. So it's something that I'm kind of diving into, I would say, right now. And what I think is interesting is, Matuska and Christensen have been writing about lifestyle balance and balance, life balance, and they have the model of life balance. And what I think is interesting, and you and I were talking about it a little bit before, but is that the subjective nature of balance. So I may have the same amount of time in different activities as you, but I may experience it different. I may experience it as I'm in balance and you experience as you're in imbalance, or vice versa. And so I think it's the idea of occupational balance is interesting because you have the subjective nature of it, but then Eklund and Erlandson and Orban, and there was a big article where they looked at patterns of daily occupations and occupational balance. And what they have proposed is that, or one way to look at it, is patterns of daily occupation are a little bit more objective. That how much time or how you divide your day or how you go between activities.
What you're doing.
Yeah, what you're doing. I mean, I could say I spent a certain amount of time at work and a certain amount of time with my children and a certain amount of time getting back and forth and maybe recreation or social or something. But maybe even at work, maybe I'm doing 20 different activities. So you can look at that pattern. And that's more objective. It's something to look at. Maybe you can compare to others or look at it in a bigger construct. But if I experience balance, is perhaps occupational balance. But Petra Wagman and also together with Håkansson and others have also looked at occupational balance. So I think what's interesting is that Adolf Meyer talked about work, rest, sleep, and play. So I think balance has been there from the beginning. In the kind of the core of occupational therapy, and I think we've come around back to it, saying why is this important?
Assumption.
Yeah. And and different researchers have found different things. That sometimes it's looking at, is it kind of a good balance between these things, and for others it's different. So I think that's what's interesting about balance. Although what we found in the second study that we did about balancing everyday life, the intervention, is that I can't say that people found balance, and I don't think it's possible to find balance, but it's possible to, on a daily basis, be working on balance, and that it's small steps. And so if any of us, well, this is my theory, actually. If any of us want balance, it's not a destination, it's a process. But what people were able to do is to start making lifestyle changes that led to feeling more in balance, and that they learned that it was an ongoing process. And so that's something that I think is interesting about balance, is that maybe it's not something to attain, it's something to that you're always needing to work on.
It's a dynamic.
It's dynamic. It's definitely dynamic. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Opportunity to say it more condensed.
Just to be sure, okay. It seems to be okay this time. So let's talk about project.
Okay.
Research project you have done.
Yeah. I've been lucky to be part of the Balancing Everyday Life intervention. That again, it was Argensell and Eklund who created it, and I think it's been exciting to see a clinical application of a lifestyle intervention, that was inspired by the Well Elderly lifestyle redesign, as well as then redo for women with
project.
Yeah, it's the project, but and both of them were, and so so then there isn't many interventions or similar interventions that are occupation based or occupational science inspired in mental health and that are manualized and kind of like a ready intervention. And so they created this, and it's been really exciting to see it, or to talk with occupational therapists and to talk with the participants who have gone through it. And I think, people talking about how the participants, how they learned how to value what they do and how to evaluate what they do. It's not enough just to do, it's oftentimes how it feels. Sometimes it's saying no, sometimes it's doing less so that you have more rest in your life. And if you have more rest, then actually you can do more on a more continuous basis. And so I felt that people that went through the intervention, they oftentimes could explain to me balance, but also occupational engagement. And it also brings in, personal recovery in a mental health perspective as well, and how people, could think of them, think about mental illness in a different way, and perhaps feel less stigmatized and more empowered talking with others who understood. So I think it's an exciting application, and there's other applications going on in the world as well. But seeing, lifestyle redesign that was inspired by occupational science, and lifestyle redesign was, done in Los Angeles, and here we are in Sweden, and it's being done in the mental health care here in Sweden. So, yeah.
Is the transcription from lifestyle redesign to the different projects you are part here is difficult, or it's the cultural adaptation is not something very difficult to do?
I don't know if it's I think every intervention that you're doing, you need to be aware of the cultural setting that it's being done in. I didn't do the adaptation, but it's not just an adaptation. It was inspired by.
Yes, it's not a direct translation.
No,
from the original one. Yeah.
No, exactly. The original was for elderly, living in Los Angeles, and this is for, anyone from 18 to 65 or older, kind of working age, who they're a mental health service user. So it's definitely a different population, and of course a different culture as well. But I think that's where we can kind of inspire research and also clinical interventions with each other by publishing and by talking about what we're doing. So I think that's very exciting.
Yes. About this research project, so you are part in the BEL project, Balance Everyday Life, and have you done some project where you have to use some specific tools, or not yet? I mean, do you use specific tools when you are doing your research, some specific measurement instruments?
Yes, we had a whole stack. We had a lot.
Yeah.
And that, my part a lot of it has been qualitative. So I've used grounded theory to explore the participant experiences. And the first place that took us was the meaning of the group experience. And so we mapped out the process of meaning making in the group experience, because it was very important, and in the early interviews it was coming up as a very important thing. So we were able to kind of focus on that and develop. And then the second, we're looking at the actual process of making lifestyle changes, or making changes in order to move towards a more balanced lifestyle. And so the the tools we were using there is qualitative grounded theory, but this specific project was also RCT, and so it's been recently published, so this is 2017 that we're talking right now, so it was published in the last month, and that you can look at, it's there's quality of life measures and others. I don't know if Mona talked about that. So so there's a lot of, we did a lot of different measurements, and those were mostly participant, perceptions of different things such as balance, engagement.
For each one, you use a specific tool, maybe not in qualitative methodology, but
well, we use both qualitative and quantitative. So the quantitative, we had quite a lot of measurements.
Adapted to different concepts, or more general.
Yeah, they were established, like a sense of coherence, and they're established questionnaires that so that's that have been tested in other places. One of them is the oval PD, which has been developed here in Lund, as well as the SDO, the satisfaction with daily occupations. So those were two of them, but we also did others on quality of life and things like that.
It's okay.
Okay, so you were asking me about, can you say it again?
The bridges, between practice and research.
Yeah, so the bridges between practice and research, that's not unique to occupational therapy. I think most professions have that, that there's a lot of research being done over here and then the practice is going on. But I think in the last maybe 20 years, 10, 20 years, that there's more and more work being done to bridge. And I mean, Wilding and Whiteford, I just want to let me see if that's, because I teach, I mean, they did interesting participatory action research, asking occupational therapists in the hospital, an acute hospital, how they describe occupation, and the occupational therapists were struggling, and so then they continued on. That was the first part of the research, was to say yes, they are struggling to describe what they do. Yes. And that's kind of a common, how do we describe what we do in different settings, and the name occupation, but then what was interesting about their research is that they went on to work with the occupational therapists and create ways that then they had access, and they had I think their own structure in their own book that was connecting the constructs. I think they called it praxis, but practice and the research or the ideas, and combining them. And that's just one example. But I think occupational science, I think it's a tool. But I think from the beginning, the idea of occupational science was also to be able to study occupation and not always worry about the clinical application. That sometimes it's good to have basic knowledge about occupation. And maybe that will inform research or inform clinical applications. It's also possible to do research in occupational therapy. It doesn't always have to be occupational science. But I think that there have been more bridges built because of the research that's being done. And I think that's where it's nice when clinicians and researchers can either partner or, kind of get maybe some education in both or work in both so that they can do this. So I think it's a common problem. It's not just unique to us, but I think there's things that we can do about it. And I think sometimes we forget how much has happened in the last 20 years. 20, I mean, more than that. But it's been about 20 years since I've been in the field.
So, teaching and giving education about occupation and about occupational science seems to be a challenge. And how do you...
Is it a challenge?
Can be.
Yeah, okay.
Can be.
Yeah?
Could be.
It could be a challenge,
It could be, yeah. For it can imply a change in the paradigm, or a change in the way of teaching occupational therapy, and how you...
Yeah, any change in any paradigm is challenging.
Exactly.
Yeah, kind of changing maybe the way it's being done, and
that's what's happened in French-speaking areas, this shift of paradigm that is occurring. So the challenge is to accompany this change.
And I think shifts of paradigms are exciting, you know. It's
challenging and exciting.
Yeah.
Of course.
But, I mean, one thing, you know, I spoke about Wilding and Whiteford before, but I have a journal club with the students, and we read Yerxa from 1998, I think we read, you know, and where she's kind of reflecting on where occupational science has come from, and then where she envisions it in the future. And what I think is really interesting about Yerxa is the things that she thinks that we maybe can be and should be studying in the future is research that's happening right now. So, I mean, she's definitely a visionary. But then we also go to Wilding and Whiteford, which addresses the issue of, you know, can we explain what we do in a clinical practice, and why doesn't everyone know what I do here, you know, sort of thing. And then we also bring in Florence Clark's article about power in a profession. And I think it's exciting because we can have discussions that what the students have seen in practice when they've been out to their, by that time they've been out for, 2-day, practice. So they've been out, they've seen, a few places, and I think that's exciting. And then at Lund, it's occupational science and the idea of occupation-based practice is throughout the education. So I think we always have really good discussions with the students, and I think it's exciting to discuss what is occupation, what is occupational therapy, what is occupational science, and why do we have an occupational science? Why did we feel like we needed it as a profession? And I think that's where we come back to that. We needed our own science. It's instead of having to always go to other professions, we needed to be able to study what we focus our therapy on, as well as to do research on the clinical part as well. So so I mean, I think it's nice to be able to have those discussions with the students.
Debates.
And where are we now? Not many people get to be part of a profession who, in their lifetime or at least a little bit before their lifetime, that a new science has been born, and that we get to be part of it. We get to be part of the formulation. So, yes, there can be an expert who has a definition, but what's actually the paradigm shift and the exciting thing, I think, is that the students who are now learning about occupation-based practice and occupational science and occupational therapy, that they are then going out into the clinic, and then that's going to, change in the future what's happening in the clinic. Hopefully, just seeing more opportunities for, how can we develop this, and maybe we need a questionnaire that incorporates occupation and meaningful occupation. You know, I'm just giving that as an example, but there's small things that we can do as students, as teachers, as clinicians, as researchers, that all these small changes, you know, add up. And so it's not that we have to go out and change everything today, but if we do, you know, a little bit, you know, this generation, or, you know, the students that we're teaching today are going, you know, they're going to be supervisors in a few years, and in 10 years and 20 years, they're going to be the older occupational therapists, and then their newer students are going to also have, you know, been learning about occupational science and occupation-based focus, or whatever we're focusing on in 20 years. But I think we'll just have more research on it. But I think it's exciting to look backwards. Where did this come from? Why did it come about? And also, where is it going? So I think that's exciting.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're asking me about
leadership.
Leaders in occupational therapy. And I mean, if you look at our textbooks and our articles, I mean, I think these are, there's so many leaders in the field, and so it's quite humbling, I think, you know, when you see all of the research and that's being done, as well as the education, you know, that's being developed, and the interventions that are being developed. So, you know, I think worldwide we have many leaders, but, you know, in Florence Clark's article about power, what I like, and that's one of the reasons why we teach it in the literature seminar that I do, is to look at how can we be powerful as individuals, and how can that affect the profession. And one of the examples, you know, sometimes the students are, and that's something that Clark talks about, is that power, sometimes we have a negative connotation, that it's a leader, like a powerful leader, or it can be a negative thing. But she equates it to fire. Fire is good because it can keep us warm. It can also be destructive, and it's the same thing with power, that power is there. And so, but one of the things that she talks about is that just being a good occupational therapist and helping our client or our patient can be a good use of power. And even being a good friend, you know, can be a good use of that, can be powerful, that you are affecting somebody's life. So I think it's exciting to look at the leaders that we have and what they're developing, because we can learn from them, and there's people who are taking a lot of time to look at these concepts, and occupational science, occupational justice, occupational balance, occupational therapy, you know, where are we going in the future? And there's so much that's being done, and we can learn about that. But then it's also just, how can I work on myself as an occupational therapist? You know, maybe it's taking a leadership role in a local political party, because we want to support healthcare and well-being in our community. That can be very powerful. And so I think we can look to leaders, but if we only look to the leaders, then we're missing actually the day-to-day interactions that make a big difference. So that's my thought about leadership, I would say, is that let's be inspired by these people who are maybe writing the books, but at the same time, you know, don't forget what we can do on a daily basis.